So, I released an Oraxia video. It was a solid build at the time, but that was when she was, of course, still bugged. Ooh, the naughty B word, you can't say that. Her toxin damage scaling was just off and wasn't hitting right. That issue was somewhat solved with a patch. And of course, that was followed up with some additional bugs that were of course patched out. And now she's in somewhat of a stable state where she does damage. Still clunky to maneuver, but is an okay frame. And with all of that, what has changed from my previous video? Well, now I swapped her Archon Shard loadout and Helminth ability placement, turning her into a full weapon platform. Now, for some major questions that usually come creeping and crawling into people's minds. Is she better than Saryn? Can she even compete with Saryn? And the answer to those questions is...
You having a laugh? Is he having a laugh?
No, she is the Copium Saryn. So why would you play her? Because she's new, and of course people have been playing Saryn for too long and they just want, a different playstyle. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Oraxia does scale Toxin pretty well, but not at the level of Saryn with her Toxic Clash, as that ability has multiple ways to scale its damage without even including strength. And the synergy with so many weapons, and you can have that ability alongside Roar, which Oraxia cannot, because you're unable to have Roar equipped unless she removes her fourth ability.
Look what they need to mimic a fraction of our power.
So her best in slot Helminth for a weapon platform build is none other than Uru. For those suggesting Zata and Breach Surge, let me explain how those are just not a good choice. I mean, you can use them, I ain't stopping you, but listen up. Breach Surge does not do damage the way you think it does damage, because it only does damage when you do a lot of damage.
What does that mean?
Because it applies the surge sparks on enemies, so when you deal damage to those affected enemies and kill them, it multiplies the damage you dealt to the affected enemies and sends it out as a spark to damage subsequent nearby enemies. It's literally a damage taxi. In Zata's case, you always need to prioritize high pellet count guns and aim for weak points, otherwise no damage. And Zata scales even higher with a bunch of elemental damage equipped on the weapon and other sources of damage multipliers. So what does Nourish offer? For one, it's not just an energy multiplier, but it is a large pre-combined elemental damage multiplier to all your weapons and weapon-like abilities. It also affects your allies. I previously had this on my first ability, so when I activated Nourish, it would affect Oraxia's Scuttlers. So they will deal viral alongside the toxin and impact damage. Of course, having Archon continuity, they also proc corrosive. And Nourish does also have damage retaliation. When you take damage, you release a viral nova around you. Little viral farts that stagger enemies. With this being a weapon platform build, I'm replacing the Scuttlers in favor of the Helminth, because for one, Scuttlers don't scale with enemy level, but mission level, they're just stupid, just like every companion AI in Warframe. DE, please fix this. They mess up spawns and are not going to be of any use on this build. Also, guys, DE included, we really need to talk about how the only viable damage scaling Helminths are Roar and Nourish. Oh wait, I did talk about it in this video. Go check it out and let me hear your input. Also, did some of you notice how DE is silently nerfing us with the 3 recent frames not being able to use Roar unless they remove their signature ability? A topic for another video. Anyway, now that we know our Helminth choice wasn't really a mystery because there's only 2 choices, let's move on to our Archon Shards. I previously had red shards and now swapped them out for full-on toxin damage green shards to increase my toxin damage scaling. If I was able to use this and Roar, oh man, just saying. So the Archon Shards I went with, the Toxin status effects deal more damage. This bonus is the Elementalist mods, but only for Toxin damage. And this damage multiplier is additive to the Elementalist mods, for those wondering. Furthermore, this bonus is a final damage multiplier to faction damage multipliers. So you see how this would have been so good with Roar? In the end, I slapped 4 of those, giving me a total of 180% Toxin status damage increase. And the final shard is increasing my max corrosive stacks by 3. So this would take my armor strip to 98%. We don't need to do a full armor strip because of the amount of damage we deal. To understand why this setup is important, let's go over my 4th ability, the bread and butter of this build, Silken Stride. imbues all my guns with the Toxin elemental damage multiplier. And this Toxin damage increase is separate from my elemental combination and will be present alongside them. It's a guaranteed proc of Toxin damage, and when you kill an enemy, they explode in a Toxin Nova, dealing ability Toxin damage. And this is where you can also reapply corrosive with your abilities, thanks to Archon continuity. Now that you understand what we're working with, let's go over the weapon and synergy. The Sobek, the Acid Shells taxi. When you kill enemies with this weapon and augment equipped, they will explode, dealing a flat amount of corrosive damage and additionally a percentage of the enemy's maximum health as blast damage in an AoE. To make this make sense, find healthy big boy. Shoot healthy big boy. And when healthy big boy die, you get bigger kabloomy compared to killing scrawny little guy. This kabloomy has damage fall off, and it's bad. And this is why Oraxia's Toxin Nova and Toxin procs allow it to carry over into newer fresh kabloomies, chaining more kabloomies, because the subsequent hits killing the targets are still considered weapon damage from your Sobek, affected by your 4th ability and the elemental damage it's force procking to give it a free ride to Damage Town.
Hot diggity dog!
So with all of that said and done, let's have a look at the entire build setup put together. Starting off with Arcane Bellicose and Oraxia. Yes, it does work with her 4th ability. Her Silken Stride pairs perfectly well with this Arcane, as it's a dynamic real-time updated buff, because the Arcane applies after your max health increase, which Oraxia does with her 4th ability. And that's why it's going to be a staple on Oraxia alongside Molt Augmented, which stacks up to 60% strength after 250 kills. Again, Crepulskar is lower in strength, inconsistent, and a temporary buff. That's why it's not worth it. Now, for the mods. Corrosive Projection in the Aura for the 18% armor reduction, and the additional strength increases comes from Power Drift in the Exilus, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, and finally Precision Intensify. All of these greatly increase my damage and health. Precision boosts my 4th ability strength by 90%, so that takes my health past 3000 to fully stack Bellicose and further increase my Toxin damage. And because I have negative duration, now I'll buff it with Archon Continuity and Constitution. Archon Continuity triggers on all my Toxin-based abilities, so my 1st, 2nd, and 4th ability Nova to add a corrosive stack when applying a Toxin proc. For range, I only have Stretch. This is more than enough for my 2nd and 4th ability. Without Augur Reach, my 2nd ability loses 3 meters, and my 4th loses 1.5. And with the Giga Explosions from Acid Shells, you won't notice the difference, especially how fast you kill. And finally, for energy and maintenance, I have Flow and Equilibrium, Large Energy Pool, and Orb Pickup Conversion, an insane combo paired with your 1st ability and Nourish. Now onto the Sobek build. I'm using the Kuva Sobek so we can get an additional boost to our elemental damage, crits, and base damage. The Valence element is electric, so I can mod my weapon with the Toxin element and get corrosive. Now some of you may ask, why not go for bonus Toxin so you can use Prime Charge Shell for a larger elemental boost and still get the same elemental combination? Good question. The reason being is Acid Shells. When it triggers, it will force proc your element, and in this case, Toxin. So you want to prioritize Toxin multipliers. That is then multiplied by your Elementalist buffs and faction damage multipliers. Onto the build. For the Arcane, I have Primary Blight, which provides me a boost in my critical damage and multi-shot when you proc the Toxin element with your weapon. You may have noticed, I have no multi-shot modded. Well, because it isn't needed, since this is an Acid Shells Kabloomy build, and Acid Shells isn't affected by multi-shot. And for the other mods, base damage, crit chance and crit damage to enhance our initial hits with crits, and of course, fire rate isn't an issue as this is a one-tap build. Our elemental damage mod, Elementalist for the status damage and magazine capacity, this gives me 12 extra shots in the mag, pretty useful. And finally, for the flex slot, you can add Savvy for the increase in damage and status chance, or additional Toxin elemental damage, another faction damage multiplier if you're doing a Fisher, or you can also use Savvy as your main base damage mod instead of Point Blank, but I personally prefer Point Blank for the consistency. So yeah, it's pretty much up to you at the end of the day. Lastly, for my companion, the Panzer Volpophyla. Very important for the viral spread and tenacious bond. His weapon, pretty basic build to deal damage and make sure it has bite, so it takes your crit chance over 50% to always apply tenacious bond. And yeah, folks, this is the updated Oraxia build, which is just pretty much a copium Saryn. Anyway, that has been it for me. I do hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. And if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and
Subscribe.
for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching. As always, peace.